The Universal Court of Justice had never sentenced anyone to Kepler 442b before. Not because they were merciful, not because the law forbade it, but because no one had ever survived long enough to make the sentence worth the fuel cost of the transport shuttle. Lieutenant Owen Reeves stood in the crystalline judgment chamber, his wrists bound in photonic restraints that hummed with enough energy to vaporize him if he so much as flinched wrong. Around him, holographic representatives from 47 member species of the Galactic Coalition watched with expressions ranging from smug satisfaction to what might have been pity. The presiding arbiter, a Velkaran whose carapace gleamed like polished obsidian, raised 3 of its 6 arms. The chamber fell silent. Owen Reeves of Earth. The arbiter's voice resonated through the chamber's acoustic enhancement field. You stand convicted of the unauthorized operation of a military vessel, destruction of coalition property valued at 17 billion credits, and the arbiter paused, mandibles clicking in what Reeves had learned to recognize as disgust, the deaths of 14 enforcement officers during your escape attempt. Reeves said nothing. His jaw was set, his eyes forward. He'd stopped trying to explain 3 months ago. The recommended sentence, the arbiter continued, is immediate termination. However, another pause. The human delegation has invoked the Kashalan Accord, demanding trial by survival, as is your species' right as provisional coalition members. A ripple of reaction moved through the assembled species. The Kashalan Accord was ancient, designed for warrior cultures who valued honor over mercy. Earth's delegation had been warned against invoking it. But Ambassador Elena Vasquez had done it anyway. Because she knew something the rest of the coalition didn't. She knew exactly what kind of human Owen Reeves was. Therefore, the arbiter's voice took on a tone of grim finality. You are hereby sentenced to 1 standard galactic year of survival on a Class-12 Deathworld. Should you survive, your crimes will be considered absolved, and you will be granted full freedom. The holographic display behind the arbiter shifted, showing a planet of deep greens and angry reds, storm systems larger than Earth's continents churning across its surface. Kepler 442b, the arbiter announced. Gravity 1.7 Earth standard. Atmosphere breathable but toxic without filtration after 72 hours. Native flora, carnivorous, aggressive and adaptive. Native fauna, classified as threat level Omega in 17 distinct categories. The display zoomed in, showing creatures that made Earth's prehistoric predators look like house pets. 6-legged apex hunters with crystalline teeth, swarms of flying organisms that could strip flesh from bone in seconds, plants that moved like animals and hunted like strategists. No previous attempt at colonization has succeeded, the arbiter added, almost as an afterthought. The last expedition sent to study the planet lost all 47 members within the first week. For the first time since entering the chamber, Reeves allowed himself a small smile. The arbiter noticed. You find your sentence amusing, human? No, Your Honor, Reeves replied, his voice steady. I was just thinking that a year is a long time. You might want to send a supply ship or 2 for when I'm ready to come home. The Velkaran's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. The transport leaves in 1 hour. You will be provided with standard survival gear and a distress beacon. Once activated, the beacon will summon retrieval, though I suspect it will only be needed to recover your remains. As the guards led him away, Reeves caught sight of Ambassador Vasquez in the observation gallery. She touched 2 fingers to her temple in a subtle salute. He returned the gesture. They thought they were sending him to die. They had no idea they were sending him home. The drop pod hit Kepler 442b's atmosphere like a meteor, its ablative shielding screaming as it converted kinetic energy into a light show visible from orbit. Inside, strapped into a crash harness, designed for species with more limbs than humans possessed, Reeves rode out the turbulence with practiced calm. He'd done worse jumps. Much worse. The pod's descent slowed as its repulsor systems engaged, fighting against the planet's brutal 1.7 G pull. Warning lights flashed as the external sensors registered the hostile environment. Acid rain, atmospheric pressure spikes, and thermal readings that fluctuated wildly between freezing and scalding. The final impact jarred every bone in his body despite the inertial dampeners. The harness released automatically, and Reeves dropped to the pod's floor, which was now tilted at a 30-degree angle. Through the viewport, he could see thick, purple-tinged vegetation pressing against the transparent aluminum. Welcome to Kepler 442b, the pod's AI announced in flat, dispassionate tones. Local time 1437 standard. Temperature 41 degrees Celsius. humidity 97%. Warning: atmospheric toxicity levels will reach critical threshold in 71.6 hours. Breathable air reserves 720 hours. Food reserves 1,460 hours. Water filtration capacity 4,380 hours. Reeves ignored the readout. He'd already done the math. The supplies they'd given him would last about a month if he was careful. The Coalition clearly expected him to die long before then. He moved to the equipment locker, taking inventory. A standard survival pack. Molecular forge, capable of reassembling matter at the atomic level, useful for water purification and basic tool creation, but energy-intensive. A handheld environmental scanner. A monomolecular blade, which would cut through damn near anything but would probably shatter after a few dozen uses on this planet's crystalline predators. And the distress beacon, sitting in its protective case like a coward's way out. He left the beacon where it was. The pod's outer hatch hissed open, and the jungle hit him like a physical force. The heat was oppressive, the humidity thick enough to drink, and the smell, rotting vegetation mixed with something sharp and chemical, like ozone and copper. But it was the sound that made him pause. The jungle wasn't just alive, it was screaming. Calls and shrieks echoed from every direction, some high-pitched enough to make his teeth ache, others so deep they resonated in his chest. Something massive crashed through the underbrush to his left. Something else answered from above, and Reeves looked up to see the canopy moving, rippling with the passage of creatures he couldn't yet identify. He stepped out of the pod, boots sinking into soil that was more organic slurry than dirt. Immediately, the vegetation nearest him recoiled, stalks and vines pulling back as if burned. Interesting. Something in his scent, or perhaps the pod's residual heat, had triggered a defensive response. Reeves knelt, examining the plants more closely. The leaves were thick and waxy, shot through with veins that pulsed with what looked disturbingly like blood. Thorns the length of his thumb protruded from every stem, each one weeping a clear fluid that hissed when it hit the ground. Acidic defense mechanism, he muttered, making mental notes. Probably triggered by vibration or chemical signatures. A shadow passed overhead, too fast to track. Reeves rolled sideways on instinct, and something slammed into the ground where he'd been crouching. The creature was roughly bird-shaped if birds were made of knife blades and malice. Its beak, designed for punching through armor, not pecking, had buried itself 6 inches into the solid ground. It shrieked, trying to wrench itself free. Reeves didn't give it the chance. The monomolecular blade whispered from its sheath, and the creature's head separated from its body, with almost surgical precision. He wiped the blade clean on his sleeve and examined his first kill. The body was already dissolving, flesh breaking down into constituent compounds that the jungle floor absorbed with disturbing eagerness. In 30 seconds, there was nothing left but bones, if you could call the crystalline internal structure bones. Fast decomposition, Reeves noted. Efficient nutrient recycling. This ecosystem is optimized for rapid biomass conversion, which meant everything here was food for something else, including him. He activated the environmental scanner, letting it map the immediate area. The readout was concerning. Thermal signatures everywhere, thousands of them, ranging from small as insects to large as earth elephants. And they were all moving, constantly shifting, hunting and being hunted in an endless cycle of violence. But Reeves smiled again, that same small expression that had confused the Arbiter, because before he'd been a military pilot, before he'd stolen that ship to save his crew from a suicide mission, ordered by politicians who'd never seen combat, before any of that, Owen Reeves had been a survival instructor, and not just any survival instructor. He'd trained special forces operatives in the Alaskan wilderness, in the Sahara, in the Amazon rainforest, and in a dozen other places where the Earth itself tried to kill you. Kepler 442b was more extreme, but the principles were the same: shelter, water, fire, food, And the most important rule of all, don't fight the environment. Learn from it, adapt to it, become part of it. Reeves shouldered his pack and started moving, leaving the pod behind. Within 20 meters, the jungle had swallowed it completely. He was home. The Coalition monitoring station registered the first anomaly on day 4. Junior Technician Zilrax, a Therian with compound eyes and 6 delicate manipulator arms, was reviewing the automated feeds from Kepler 442b when the irregularity appeared in the data stream. She flagged it for her supervisor almost immediately. "What am I looking at?" Senior Monitor Korth leaned over her station, his massive frame casting her instruments in shadow. "The human's biosignature, sir." Zilrax highlighted the relevant section of her display. "It's still active. 4 days is longer than expected, but hardly unprecedented." Korth rumbled. "Some species have lasted a full week before." "No, sir. You misunderstand." Zilrax adjusted the display. "The biosignature isn't just active. It's moving, systematically, in patterns." Korth stared at the screen. The human had traveled over 30 kilometers from his drop point. Following what appeared to be a search grid, the movement pattern suggested purpose, not panic. "Pull up the surface feed," Korth ordered. The orbital cameras provided limited resolution, but what they showed made Korth's crest flatten in confusion. The human had built something. Reeves stood back from his shelter, critically examining his work. It wasn't pretty, a basic A-frame structure woven from the tough, vine-like growths that climbed the larger trees. But it was functional. More importantly, it was learning. The vines weren't just structural material. They were alive, semi-sentient in the way that many of Kepler's plants seemed to be. They'd attacked him the first time he'd tried to cut them. But after he'd carefully harvested a section, taking only what he needed, leaving the main growth intact, the plants had adjusted. They still reacted to his presence, but now it was curiosity rather than hostility. And when he'd woven them into a shelter frame, they'd actually helped, their smaller tendrils interweaving in ways that strengthened the structure. Symbiosis. The jungle operated on it. Everything here was connected, communicating through chemical signals and perhaps something else, something the scanner registered as low-frequency electromagnetic pulses. Reeves had stopped fighting the ecosystem 3 days ago. Instead, he'd started listening to it. The carnivorous plants. They only attacked when startled, or when they detected the chemical signature of prey species. Walk calmly, broadcast your presence through steady vibrations, and they left you alone. The crystalline predators, ambush hunters, most of them, they relied on silence and sudden violence, but they also had territories, marked by scent glands and acoustic signatures. Stay out of their hunting grounds during peak activity hours, and you could coexist. The flying things, he'd started calling them razor wings, hunted in packs at dawn and dusk. During the day, they roosted in the upper canopy. At night, they slept. Avoid their hunting hours, and they were manageable. Everything could be learned. Everything had patterns. Water had been his first priority. The rain was acidic but manageable. The molecular forge could neutralize it, though the process was energy-intensive. Better was the discovery of root systems that stored purified water. The plants used it as a defense mechanism, flooding their tissue to dilute toxins. Tap them correctly, and you could harvest liters without killing the plant. Food was trickier. Most of the local fauna was toxic to humans, their biochemistry too alien. But there were exceptions. Small armored creatures that burrowed in the mulch. When you cracked open their shells, the meat inside was actually edible. Tasted like copper and regret, but it kept him alive. And then there were the fruits. He'd found them on day 6, growing high in the canopy, on trees that had to be 60 meters tall. The fruits glowed faintly at night, bioluminescent markers advertising their presence. Everything on this planet that glowed was usually poisonous, a warning to potential predators. But Reeves had watched, and he'd noticed that certain creatures, small, quick things with surprising intelligence in their multifaceted eyes, ate the fruits without ill effect. If they could eat it, maybe he could too. The scanner had confirmed the fruits were carbon-based, with proteins and sugars that human digestion could theoretically process. The bioluminescence came from a separate compound, likely defensive but not inherently toxic. He'd tried a small piece, waited 6 hours. No adverse effects. Tried more, waited 12 hours. Still alive. By the end of the first month, Reeves had mapped 3 square kilometers of jungle. He'd identified 17 edible food sources, 12 potable water sources, and catalogued the behavioral patterns of 43 different predator species. He'd also stopped using the molecular forge's air filtration entirely. The atmosphere's toxicity was real, but it was also adaptive. His lungs had started adjusting, probably some beneficial mutation from the increased oxygen partial pressure combined with trace elements in the air. His body was changing, becoming more efficient at processing the local chemistry. Humans were good at that, adapting, surviving. It's what made them human. And in orbit, the monitoring station's alarms began to sound. Month 3 brought the first coalition inspection team. They arrived in a hardened survey vessel, weapons hot and shields at maximum, prepared for a recovery mission. The biosignature indicated the human was still alive, which was impossible enough to warrant investigation. Captain Vryn, a Kethran warrior with scales like burnished bronze and a military record that spanned 3 decades, led the 4-person team personally. They descended in full combat armor, each suit rated to withstand direct hits from Kepler's apex predators. Remember, Vryn's voice crackled through the team's comm system. We're here to observe and, if possible, retrieve. Do not engage local wildlife unless absolutely necessary. The last team we sent to this planet died in 4 days. One of the other team members finished. We know, sir. They landed in a clearing 2 kilometers from Reeves' last known position. Immediately, the jungle's hostility made itself known. Plants thrashed at their presence. Things with too many legs and not enough regard for physics skittered away into the undergrowth. And somewhere in the distance, something roared, a sound that made their armor's audio dampeners strain. Life signs, the scanner operator reported. Thousands of them, threat levels ranging from moderate to, "Sir, the scanner just flagged something as unsurvivable. Direction, 300 meters, bearing 270. They moved in formation, weapons ready. Vryn had fought in border wars and pirate raids. He'd trained for every combat scenario the coalition military could devise. Nothing had prepared him for what they found. The clearing wasn't natural. Someone had made it, carefully removing vegetation in a precise circle, maybe 40 meters across. In the center stood a structure, not the crude survival shelter Vryn had expected, but something approaching architecture. The building rose 3 stories, constructed from living plants that had been coaxed into growing in specific patterns. Walls of interwoven vines, reinforced with what looked like the crystalline bones of local predators. A roof of overlapping leaf plates that channeled rainwater into collection systems. And around the perimeter, markers, skulls of creatures Vryn recognized from the database as apex predators, arranged in deliberate warning patterns. By the founders, someone whispered. Movement caught Vryn's attention. A figure emerged from the structure, and it took him a moment to recognize it as human. Owen Reeves had changed. He was leaner, his muscles defined by months of constant physical challenge. His skin had darkened, probably from exposure, and possibly from dietary changes. The scanner showed elevated levels of compounds consistent with local food sources. He wore clothing made from processed plant fibers and tanned hides, functional and well-crafted. But it was his eyes that struck Vryn most. They were alert, calm, and completely at ease. This was not a man fighting for survival. This was a man who had already won. Captain Vryn, Reeves greeted him, his voice carrying easily across the clearing. I'd offer you refreshments, but I wasn't expecting company for another 9 months. Vryn's translator struggled with the human's tone, something between amusement and mild annoyance. Owen Reeves, we're here to assess your condition. Assess? Reeves tilted his head. You mean verify, I haven't died yet. Your survival is unexpected, is it? Reeves looked around the clearing, at the structure, at the carefully managed ecosystem he'd created. This is a Class 12 Deathworld by your standards. But you know what it is by mine. He paused, letting the question hang. It's Earth on a Tuesday. One of Vryn's team members laughed, a nervous sound that died quickly when Vryn shot him a look. You cannot possibly compare. A roar cut through the air, close enough to make the team's armor register proximity alerts. Every weapon came up, targeting the jungle's edge. Reeves didn't move. The creature that emerged from the vegetation was massive, 6 meters of crystalline armor, 6 legs ending in scythe-like claws, and a head full of teeth that could probably bite through their combat suits like tissue paper. The database had classified this species as a Tier 7 apex predator, unsurvivable without heavy weapons support. It stalked into the clearing, eyes fixed on Reeves, and stopped. Reeves raised one hand, palm out, made a specific gesture, a twist of the wrist, fingers splayed. The predator's growl became almost questioning. It swung its massive head toward the inspection team, then back to Reeves. Reeves made another gesture, a downward wave. The creature turned and walked away, disappearing back into the jungle with surprising quietness for something its size. Silence settled over the clearing. You, Vryn's translator almost failed. You've domesticated them. Not domesticated, Reeves corrected. We have an understanding. I don't hunt in her territory during her breeding season. She doesn't eat visitors to my clearing. It's called diplomacy, Captain. He smiled, that same small expression that had confused the Arbiter months ago. You want to assess my condition. I'm thriving. This planet is harsh, yes. Dangerous, absolutely. But it's also rich, diverse, and if you know what you're doing, livable. Impossible, one of the team members said. The toxicity alone should have what? Killed me. Reeves shrugged. Human biology is adaptable. Give us a few generations, and we'll probably be breathing this atmosphere without any issues. Give me a few years, and I could walk you through every survival technique needed to colonize this place. He looked directly at Vryn. Your species tried to study this planet and failed. You sent expeditions that died. You classified it as uninhabitable. His voice hardened slightly. But you never asked the right question. Which is, you asked if you could survive here. You should have asked if you could learn to belong. Vryn stared at the human, at his impossible survival, at the home he'd built in hell. We will file our report, Vryn said finally. You do that, Reeves replied. I'll be here when my year is up. Might stay longer. Honestly, I'm starting to like the neighborhood. As the inspection team retreated to their ship, their sensors registered something their database flagged as critical information. The human's biosignature had changed. His cellular structure showed markers consistent with environmental adaptation. His neural patterns indicated not stress, but contentment. And the local ecosystem's hostility indices had dropped 17% in the 3-kilometer radius around his settlement. The planet was changing him. He was changing the planet. 12 months after his arrival, Owen Reeves activated his distress beacon. Not because he needed rescue, because his sentence was complete. The retrieval ship that came for him was larger than the one that had dropped him off, a diplomatic vessel gleaming and pristine against Kepler 442b's angry skies. Ambassador Vasquez herself was aboard, along with representatives from 6 coalition member species and a full media contingent. They found him waiting in his clearing, which had expanded to nearly a square kilometer. His settlement had grown into something resembling a small village, multiple structures, organized gardens of carefully cultivated plants, and what looked disturbingly like aquaculture ponds. The vegetation around the settlement had changed too. The aggressive carnivorous plants had been, not exactly tamed, but redirected. They formed natural barriers, defensive perimeters that protected the settlement while still maintaining their wild nature. And the predators, dozens of species that the Coalition database marked as kill-on-sight threats, moved through the area with casual indifference to the humans' presence. Reeves met them in clothing that was now entirely of his own making, woven fibers, treated hides and accessories made from reclaimed materials. He looked healthy, fit, and utterly unconcerned by the delegation's shock. "Ambassador," he greeted Vasquez with a slight nod. "Good to see you, Lieutenant Reeves." Vasquez's expression was carefully neutral, but he could see the satisfaction in her eyes. "I see you've adapted. Thrived. Actually," Reeves corrected. "This planet is remarkable once you stop trying to fight it." One of the Coalition representatives, a Velcaran similar to the one who'd sentenced him, stepped forward. "Your survival is unprecedented. The Arbiter requests a full report on your methodologies." "Of course," Reeves said. "But first, I have a question." "Proceed." "You classified this planet as a Class-12 Deathworld. Uninhabitable. Too dangerous for colonization or even long-term study." Reeves gestured to his settlement. "Does my survival change that classification?" The Velcaran's mandibles clicked uncertainly. "One survival does not invalidate the deaths of 47 previous." "Then let me teach them." Silence. "I'm sorry," the Velcaran asked. "The lesson," Reeves said. "The one you accidentally gave me when you sent me here. You wanted to punish me by dropping me into an impossible situation. Instead, you gave me exactly what I needed." He turned to Vasquez. "Before I was a pilot, I was a survival instructor. I trained people to endure Earth's harshest environments. This," he gestured to the jungle, "is more extreme, yes, but the principles are the same. Observation, adaptation, respect for the ecosystem. You proposed to teach Coalition members how to survive here," the Velcaran asked. "I proposed to teach them how to thrive here," Reeves corrected. "This planet isn't a death world, it's a resource. Rich in biodiversity, mineral deposits, and," he smiled, "character-building experiences." Vasquez spoke up. "The Coalition has been looking for suitable training grounds for Special Forces operations. Environments that test adaptability and resilience. And you think Kepler 442b qualifies?" the Velcaran asked. "I think it's perfect," Vasquez replied. "If properly supervised by someone who understands both the environment and how to teach survival skills." All eyes turned to Reeves. "My sentence is complete," he said. "I'm a free man, which means I'm free to make you an offer." He pulled out a data chip, constructed from reclaimed pod materials and local crystals but functional. "On this chip is everything I've learned. Food sources, water sources, predator patterns, safe zones, communication techniques for the semi-sentient flora. A complete survival manual for this environment." He held it out. "I'll give you this, and I'll personally train anyone you send here, on 3 conditions." "Name them," Vasquez said immediately. 1. My military record is cleared. All of it. The ship I stole was saving my crew from a suicide mission. That's recorded fact now, admitted by the politicians who ordered it. I want exoneration." Vasquez nodded. "Already in process. The court proceedings began 6 months ago." "What else?" 2. This planet gets reclassified. Not as a death world, but as a training ground. Protected status, with strict limits on exploitation." The Velcaran's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "That would require approval from the very council members whose security forces you want me to train," Reeves finished. "I'm sure they'll see the value." "And the 3rd condition?" Vasquez asked. Reeves smiled. "I want to go home. Not to Earth, though I'll visit. Home to here, this settlement. I want to build a proper training facility, and I want autonomy to run it my way. You want to stay here?" The Velcaran sounded genuinely confused. After everything, this is where I belong," Reeves said simply. "You tried to punish me by sending me to hell. You didn't realize I'd already been there. in boardrooms and command centers where people made decisions that got good soldiers killed. This, he gestured to the jungle. This is honest. This is pure. This is where I want to be. The delegation conferred quietly among themselves. Vasquez watched Reeves with something approaching pride. Finally, the Velcaran spoke. We accept your conditions, pending formal approval, which I believe will be enthusiastically granted. Reeves handed over the data chip. Then let me show you around, he said. I've been working on expansion plans. This clearing can support a facility for 30 trainees at a time, and I've identified 17 additional sites for satellite camps, each with unique environmental challenges. As they toured the settlement, the media contingent recorded everything. By the time they returned to orbit, the images were already spreading across the Coalition's communication networks. A human, on a Class-12 Deathworld, not just surviving but thriving, building, teaching, belonging. The lesson wasn't lost on anyone. 2 years after his return to Kepler 442b, the Reeves Survival Academy had trained over 300 Coalition personnel from 23 different species. The facility had expanded to include permanent structures, still built in harmony with the environment, still respecting the delicate balance of the ecosystem. Students learned not just to survive, but to understand, to observe, to adapt, to see hostile environments not as enemies, but as teachers. Reeves stood on the observation deck of the main facility, watching a mixed group of Kethrans, Therians, and yes, even a few Velcarans navigate the jungle under the watchful eyes of his assistant instructors. All humans, all former special forces, all people who understood what it meant to survive against impossible odds. Ambassador Vasquez joined him, her visits now regular and always welcome. The council formally apologized today, she said, without preamble. For your trial, your sentence, everything. They're offering full reinstatement at your former rank, plus back pay and honors. Reeves didn't look away from the jungle. And what did you tell them? That you're exactly where you need to be. She smiled. Was I right? Completely. He gestured to the trainees below. See that Velcarin. 3 weeks ago, she was terrified of the carnivorous plants. Now she's teaching her squad how to use them for perimeter defense. That Kethrin. He wanted to burn down a section of jungle because it was too dangerous. Now he's mapping its biodiversity for his thesis on adaptive ecosystems. You're changing how they see the universe, Vasquez observed. I'm teaching them what humanity learned the hard way, Reeves corrected. That survival isn't about domination, it's about adaptation, understanding, respect. A roar echoed from the jungle, the same apex predator that had confronted Captain Vrin's team 2 years ago. The trainees below froze, weapons ready, but Reeves had taught them well. Instead of shooting, they observed, waited, watched as the creature passed through their area without incident, heading to its own territory. When it was gone, the trainees resumed their exercise, lessons learned without a single shot fired. The galaxy used to see humans as reckless, Vasquez said quietly, aggressive, dangerous in our unpredictability. And now, Reeves asked, now they see us as survivors, adapters, teachers. She paused. You did that, Owen. One man, one impossible sentence, and you changed their entire perception of our species. I just did what humans do, Reeves replied. I survived, and then I thrived, and then I taught others to do the same. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the jungle that had been meant to kill him, that had instead become his greatest achievement. You know, Vasquez said, eventually, they're calling you the ambassador to the impossible. Reeves laughed. That's ridiculous. Is it? You took a planet classified as uninhabitable and made it a home. You took a death sentence and turned it into a school. You took the Coalition's fear of humanity and transformed it into respect. I just showed them the truth, Reeves said, that there's no such thing as an impossible environment, only impossible attitudes. Below, a student successfully negotiated passage through a patch of carnivorous plants, using the chemical signals Reeves had taught them. The student squad celebrated, their different species working together in perfect harmony. They tried to punish you, Vasquez said. Instead, they gave the galaxy a gift. Reeves smiled, that same small expression that had started everything. The best lessons, he said, are the ones we never meant to teach. If you enjoyed this story of human resilience and adaptation, imagine what other lessons humanity has to teach the galaxy. The universe is full of impossible challenges, and humans who turn them into opportunities. Want more stories of humanity proving the impossible? Follow for tales of humans exploring hostile worlds, befriending alien species, and showing the galaxy what it truly means to be adaptable, creative, and unstoppable. Because in a universe of specialized species and rigid classifications, humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our weapons, it's our ability to survive, adapt, and thrive anywhere we choose to call home.